Hello, actor. Hi, this is Jeff at McCorkle Casting. Congratulations. I now want to offer you the job that you auditioned for. Now, we have to negotiate. Don't freak out. You hate to negotiate? I'm going to help you.
Welcome to Casting Actors Cast. It's the podcast for actors in the business of show. Here is your host, Jeffrey Dreisbach.
Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of Casting Actors Cast. I'm Jeffrey Dreisbach, casting director in New York with McCorkle Casting. How are you doing? I hope you're having a really good day. I'm having a great day, and I'm really looking forward to sharing with you some information about negotiating. So we're naming this podcast Hate to Negotiate? ? Because I know that this is information that can be a little bit mind-boggling, and there's also some mystery involved in negotiating a contract. And I'm going to try and peel that apart, and we're going to discuss everything that you need to know about negotiating not only for yourself, but understanding how, if you have an agent, how your agent helps negotiate for you. So I'm going to try and jam this podcast with as much information as I can. Before we do that, this is that moment in the podcast where I want to say thank you so very, very much. I'm just thrilled that we're well into over 13,000 downloads of Casting Actors Cast ever since we started. I had one mission in mind when I started doing this podcast, and I thought, and I shared with you that if there was a bunch of people out there willing to listen and want to tune in on a regular basis, I'm happy to do this. And there are no sponsors, although, I'm kind of thinking maybe we should consider getting a sponsor. So if you have any ideas, come on, share those with me, will you please? But I purposely don't advertise. I don't leave the podcast open for outside advertisements to be thrown in there. I'm not asking you for money, nothing like that at all. I want to keep this as easy and open and available to you as possible. I don't want to inundate you with all kinds of stuff, but everything has a cost factor, right? So the cost factor would be if you wouldn't mind doing me a huge, huge favor, and that is going to the YouTube channel, Casting Actors Cast channel on YouTube, and taking a look at a couple of those episodes. Every time I do a YouTube video of the podcast, like I'm doing right now, I'm trying to improve some of those video effects and making sure that the technology is easy enough on the eyes and on the ears so that you can listen and kind of see how maybe there's some nonverbal communication that I'm sharing with you when I'm doing the video. So if there is interest in checking it out, it would mean a lot to me if you could do a thumbs up, give me a review, a like, whatever, all those kind of positive things that you can do. That's just huge incentive for me to want to continue to do this. So I appreciate that. And then finally, going to castingactorscast.com, which is the website. If you do that, there's also some freebies, some downloadable stuff. There's past episodes that you might not have listened to, and I would encourage you to check that out. There's a free book if you fill out the form called Dive into the Talent Pool. It's just a way of me seeing that there are listeners out there. You get a free downloadable 100-page PDF book called Conversation Pieces Out of the Studio, the Voiceover Workshop for Professional Actors. And that's free to you. And that's all I can say about that. So please do check these out. Give me some likes. And also, if you go to any of the podcast providers that you're getting this from, particularly iTunes, if you're listening to this through iTunes, boy, I could really use some likes and some positive reviews, any reviews, actually. I would just love to get some feedback on that. The more iTunes acknowledgments I get, then the more people have access to seeing the work here that we're doing on Casting Actors Cast. Okay, sorry, I don't mean to inundate you with all of these requests, but I know that there are a lot of you out there all over the world that are listening, and I couldn't be more grateful. And I wish one more step would be for you to help me out in that way. So thank you very, very much. So, hate to negotiate. So the premise being that you've gotten a job and now you have to find out the particulars, those elements of that job that are going to help make that final decision about whether this is something you want to do or not. It's important, I think, as we start talking about this, to keep in mind a couple of the following key concepts. These concepts, I think, will help kind of defray or pull back some of the emotionality. Is that a word? Emotionality? Emotionally, I don't know. Maybe I usually have good words, and today I'm kind of lost, I guess. The emotionality, let's just use that as a word, of what it is to put a value on your creative self. In fact, that's exactly what's happening. And there are all kinds of internal mechanisms that are taking place, right, when you get booked for a job, because you are getting paid for the job, which is great. Now, there are some actors who have this attitude, gosh, it's such a great role. I would pay them to have me do it. Well, that's not really a good professional attitude to have, and I don't recommend that at all. Please don't volunteer your talent for free. You've come a long, hard way. You've booked this job by showing up, by doing the work, by taking the adjustments, by coming to the callback. Casting directors want you to do the job, and now you've been hired. Your talent is worth whatever the market will bear, is really the great way to think about it. But I think sometimes we turn it emotionally, saying, gosh, if I asked for too much money for the part and I don't get it, then I've lost the part and I really want the part. Well, you know what? Producers sometimes know that too. And that's why they have an obligation to make sure that they come under budget if they can, or at least hit their budget. See, it might interest you to know that when we do feature film work, as an example, that we're given a very specific budget to work with for the actors that we hire. Now, if it's a small film, for example, if it's not a lot of money or it's a micro-budgeted film, a feature film, most of the time it will be what's called scale. Scale being the SAG-AFTRA minimum for the budget of that movie. So there's a daily rate and then there's a weekly rate. So you might be hired on a daily, you might be hired on a weekly, you might be hired for the whole picture because if it's a larger role. So it kind of comes down to not having a lot of negotiating room, especially where money is concerned, if you're doing one of those small budget pictures. That brings me to this concept, which is called favored nations. And favored nations, I don't know where the origin of that phrase came, but favored nations really says that everyone on the project is being paid the same, regardless. Now, this applies to theater projects that we've worked on. This also applies to film projects. This does not necessarily apply to television projects. But it applies to film projects, for example, if it's a smaller or a medium-sized budgeted film and there are favored nations contracts. Let's say there are 5 characters that appear in almost every scene, for example. The idea being is that we're paying everybody the same. Everybody gets the same amount of money. Everybody gets the same perks. Everyone gets the same travel arrangements and per diem. Per diem being a daily rate for other expenditures like food. Lodging, for the most part, is also taken care of. The same for theater. The per diem is not necessarily there, but housing for the actor, if it's a LORT theater, if it's a national tour, then there is a per diem involved. So there are some wiggle room in some of those areas, but some of that is already completely laid out and dictated by the unions, meaning you don't have a lot of negotiating room for your contracts. Now, television, of course, is a different animal. That you do a television pilot, or you're just hired to do, let's say it's an episodic television. Those budgets for those roles are pretty much laid out already. So might behoove you to understand that what they offer you might be all that they have to offer you for those particular roles. Now, an agent and or manager would have that information and they can negotiate on your behalf. But the concept of favored nations, the concept of union scale, Many times actors will get scale plus 10%. If that actor has an agent or a manager, then that scale, which is that minimum amount, plus additional 10%, so that you can then go ahead and compensate the agent or manager for the work that they do. So that's the other concept, scale plus 10%. So favored nation, scale plus 10%, because understand overall and in general, the producer needs to really keep to the budget they've set for this particular project. Now, we've all heard stories about films going way over budget and people having to put more money into the film, and it becomes really, really hard. That's one element, and that can happen. But casting directors for film will have a limited budget to work with. And so we need to be able to kind of play around a little bit with those numbers if we feel, for example, that there's a larger role and we can't really pay that actor just scale because there's so much more work involved. And so we'll decide and do our best negotiating with the agent to say, we understand it's a bigger role, but we can offer him this amount, which is above scale. And sometimes the agent will think that's great. Sometimes the agent won't think that's great because they think that there's more money to be had, for example. So I want to step back a minute because I'm getting into the weeds just a little bit in my own head about this. Understand that the producer has a budget they have to work with. The agent's obligation is to try and make as much money and to have the actor taken care of as much as possible. So the producer is trying to save money and still maintain the quality they're going after. But the agent is trying to make more money and sell the quality because of that actor, saying, you're getting a really fantastic talent here and they deserve to be compensated for that. And so that's an argument that is often made. And then the actor, in my days as an actor, I just didn't want to feel like I was getting ripped off. So actors are sort of like, they just want to be treated fairly. If there's more money to be had and because the role is harder or there's a legitimate reason because of certain external reasons for that actor, I have a family or I have to travel and I don't like to travel or, whatever those issues are, the producer has to weigh the desire for your talent as an actor over what they have as a budget and see if they can make a marriage happen. I think the issue that I'm trying to speak about without speaking about it directly, but I need to be direct with you, is I see oftentimes this us versus them mentality. And I'm not sure that's the healthiest approach. Because if you're a new actor or a young actor that you don't have a lot of credits and it's a nice, decent role in a movie, then you really want to make sure you proceed with caution in that you don't want to piss somebody off to the point where they say, you know what, you're asking for too much, we're going to withdraw the offer. And that has happened. On the other hand, your talent is worth something. Your talent in this picture can help really make the picture successful or not. And so there are all kinds of other discussions that need to take place. Some discussions that can happen are what are called in a film and television can be additional points for film, for example. That if you make film and the film is successful, that you can get some additional points once the film is released to the general public, for example. Now, that's often given to actors when the budgets of films are pretty small, saying, well, yeah, you're going to get scale plus 10%, but we'll also give you points in the film after everything is paid off and the film is released to a national or an international audience. There are some additional points that you can be given, which can relate to money. I can also tell you that points are sometimes used as a negotiation thing to help support the wanting of the actor. But through a lot of creative bookkeeping, actors oftentimes don't see those points. That's the truth of it. So you have to weigh that as well. Yet, yes, there may be a potential of actors making additional money if the film does well after everyone else gets paid. So that's another negotiating thing that can sometimes take place. So those are just kinds of some general issues that happen. Now, in terms of negotiating for other things, let's talk about readings, for example. Now, we get hired at McCorkle Casting. We'll get hired to do all kinds of readings for films, readings for new plays, readings for television projects. Sometimes a playwright or a screenwriter just wants to hear their work, and so they'll pay us to find actors, good actors, just to do a good reading of a project. Sometimes readings are done for backers, for producers, potential producers who are going to put some money into this new play, for example. And then sometimes it can be all of those things that you want to, the playwright, for example, wants to hear the play. Then the playwright wants to bring in some producer friends and have maybe a semi-staged, production. Although it's still considered a reading, there may be some blocking involved. In equity, they call that the 29-hour reading, which means 29 hours of rehearsal time, which includes the performance time. That's often used for backers of an audition. And there have been some new equity regulations about that. Many times, actors who participate in a 29-hour reading don't get right of first refusal if that production gets picked up to go into a professional venue. And that's been problematic. A lot of actors have been replaced. And now there are certain rules that will help that actor get right of first refusal, meaning that they will get offered that job if it goes to another level. Now, that's a negotiated thing as well. It doesn't mean that you'll automatically get hired. But what it does mean is that once you participate in the development of a new project, your participation in that project deserves some kind of compensation, which I think is great. On the other hand, the producer is trying their hardest to get to develop this project just to see if there are other producers with money who are going to invest in that project. So you can see it can become rather difficult. But we'll get hired to find a cast, and many actors will therefore ask for right of first refusal for a particular reading. Now, that may or may not be available to that actor. So it's usually on an individual basis based on who the actor is, but it's also based on the budget, whether it's a 29-hour reading or not, whether it's for producers to make money or whether it's just to hear the project. So there are many variables that take place in that particular scenario. So there are a few issues that I want to share just outright about negotiation in general. So I mentioned earlier about that us versus them mentality, but also I can see the reason why actors deserve to be compensated for their work. There's just no question about that. But I can also take the side or take the vision or the view of the producer saying, if I don't have actors who are in agreement about the money that we're able to pay them, then I'm not even going to be able to make this picture. Because a lot of the picture being successful or not depends on the actors that get hired, that we cast. It might interest you to know that when we get hired for a television project or for a feature film, we have our agent negotiate for us about what our compensation should be to cast the picture. And that varies all over the place because, maybe there are some motion pictures that are strictly looking for celebrity status or well-known actors who to participate in this picture. So we'll get hired to find celebrities or well-known actors. Sometimes that might not matter as much. So if it doesn't matter as much and we're able to kind of have a broader reach into the talent community, it might not take us as much time to find well-qualified talent. But if actors don't have that name recognition value, then that movie has a harder time getting made, only because unless it's a fantastic story or the extenuating reasons for this story to get made without known actors in it, It's really, really challenging sometimes for the casting people. So everyone has and wants their little stake and claim into this particular project. So if you keep all of those elements in mind, elements like favored nations, scale plus 10%, and if you have an agent, that's great. That agent is obligated and wants to get the best deal they can for you, and that's awesome. That's great. Some agents are really good at this. Some agents are really fair at this. Some agents, frankly, are not. Some agents think that they can just ask for stuff just for the sake of asking for stuff. And there are many times where we have to say, you know what? I can certainly ask my producer, but I doubt whether that's going to happen. And if that's a deal breaker, please let me know, because we may have to walk away from this. So agents pride themselves on being excellent negotiators, and that's great. We are also feeling that we are capable of negotiating well for the producer because they've hired us. It's not an us versus them. It's really has to do with what is fair. What is fair for the project? What is fair for the role? What is fair for the actor? All of those things kind of get worked out in the best of all possible worlds when it's a good deal. So there are three issues to bring up. Issue number one for a lot of actors is that money doesn't matter. I want to do the role in the first place. Well, that's just wrong. That's just a mistake. Money should matter. You should be paid for your talent. Number two, as I just said, fairness. Knowing that you've been hired and asked to do the job and it is a fair deal should be rewarding. It's not about winning or losing. It's about, in my mind, what is the fairest way to proceed. Nothing worse than working with another actor who is doing just as much work as you are and getting paid a lot more and finding out about that. That's just a terrible feeling. And a lot of times that does not happen. Make sure you analyze the source. Sometimes actors are a little more boastful about what they're making. There's all kinds of BS and nonsense that gets discussed. So I guess the bottom line and the point number three, the third issue, is that really in terms of what there is to negotiate now, it's really not as flexible as you think. There really isn't just gobs of money sitting there waiting for you to ask for. There aren't those kinds of perks. It just don't happen that way. Budgets are much tighter now than they used to be. Your value is still wanted and appreciated, but you have to weigh that against whether the role is so special or unique. You brought your talent to it, and we want you. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other talented people out there who are also able to do the job. So all of those things kind of have to weigh in together. I don't think it should have the kind of angst, the kind of stressful pressure on you as an actor. I just don't see the value in wasting your time and energy in that when you can trust that there are a lot of really good, honest, fair people who present the deal and make it as clean as possible. It's still within your right to see if there's wiggle room. Is there room for more? That certainly is okay to ask. It's also okay for us to say, guess what? That's the best we can do. I would really appreciate some communication and some feedback about this. In the meantime, I'm just going to hope that you got some stuff out of this, that there was some information there that you found useful, and we'll see you next time, right? And I hope we don't have to negotiate for that on this episode and future episodes of Casting Actors Cast. Thanks so much.
Casting Actors Cast is made possible with your support just by listening. Please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.